I guess some of the motivation techniques that we use worked a little too well. By now, just about everyone saw the scenes that took place around the country with our vaccination drive that didn't start, but restarted in a new, way more fervent way this week. And it seems like a lot of people weren't prepared for the lack of vaccine hesitancy in Trinidad. And I have several theories as to why the vaccine hesitancy would have been so low in Trinidad. And I think a lot of it had to do with how delayed our vaccine rollout was and the amount of time we were left to simmer in our thoughts. And then with Trinidad being the kind of economic powerhouse as we are, it sounds a bit like I'm tooting our own horn over here in Trinidad, but if we're thinking in a Caribbean sense, Trinidad does have a lot of the economic power of the Caribbean. So a lot of Trinidadians are accustomed to a certain type of lifestyle. So for one, just the fact that the borders may be reopened and a lot of people are fully aware that in order to travel, that you need this vaccine, then a lot of people would have, that alone would have been the motivating factor for a pretty large section of Trinidad. And then to add to that, we have the fact that many jobs are positioning the vaccination in a kind of way where it is hinged, well, not directly hinged, like if you take it, you lose your job per se, but there's an understanding that if you are attempting to get back to working in the full swing of things, then you do need this vaccine. And there are some rumors and some allegations that there are even some job places that are outright telling you you would be fired or you risk losing your job if you do not get this vaccine. And there are many questions of ethics and the balance we have between health, safety, mitigating risk, and having some amount of freedom and liberty for the citizens at the same time. So as I get into that, don't forget to click that like button if you like the video, of course. If you don't like it, well, drop a comment and tell me what you don't like about it. Comment and tell me what you think about the content in general. Feel free to move around the channel a bit, see some other videos. There are daily videos here, so there are quite a few videos to catch up on if you're interested in catching up. Chaos, confusion outside public vaccination sites. It was chaos and confusion outside vaccination sites across the country yesterday as thousands rushed for their COVID-19 jab. Yesterday marked day one of the Ministry of Health's revised vaccination rollout plan for people over the age of 60 or people under the age of 60 with non-communicable diseases. These instructions that were given apparently were not communicated properly, and many people went out there that weren't in these categories and were seeking to get vaccinated also. And then even if you have it planned only for people over 60 and people under 60 with comorbidities, that number is still a very large number. And our health minister came out quickly and apologized for the failed rollout, saying it was his fault, but in the same tone saying it was nobody's fault. So that's a bit of mixed messaging. And I believe the new plan is to go by names, but that still doesn't fully solve the problem because there's an uneven distribution of names. I saw this very interesting chart with the distribution of names, and it said that it is sourced directly from the EBC voter list. And if you look at the distribution of names, there's an uneven distribution. For some reason, the R's in Trinidad are very far ahead, and I think it may have to do with our unique mix of the Indian diaspora, and we know how some of those names have a tendency to start with R. And then not too far behind is the starting of my surname. If I'm waiting on my name to pop up, I'll have to be waiting on S. And then it seems like a very large percentage in terms of relative percentages of Trinidad have names starting with S2. And what's going to happen now? If you have R on one day, then that one R day is going to be crowded. And then on some day you're going to have X and you're going to see all 10 people who have the surname Xavier. Okay, it's not 10, I'm exaggerating, but you understand my point. There's an uneven distribution. And that's one of the problems with public when you look at public versus private. If you look at the rollout that the TTMA had over the weekend where they did it in the Nagar, the precision that generally private gets, because one of the main reasons is somebody's money is spending. And when your money is spending, when you're spending your own money, you tend to have more interest in how efficient something goes. public has a terrible problem with efficiency. Why can't we get it right on the first try in public? And some of these problems, okay, I understand that some problems, you face them as they arise. But I don't think this problem was as unpredictable as a problem that just arises in the moment. If you make the announcement as first come, first serve, people are going to attempt to come out first, and you're going to end up with a crowd. And okay, that's not to take the responsibility, the personal responsibility away from the citizens. I said this at the end of my contemplation, that if I were the 100th person, I'm watching this crowd, somebody had to be the last person to join the crowd. When I walk up to the crowd and I'm seeing this large group of people, and when you look at these crowds, because the message that was sent out that they're aiming at people over 60. So you have a large group of elderly people waiting in a pretty small area. Granted that many of them were outdoors, and that provides a little more security, a little more protection when you're thinking of COVID spreading, but still, everyone's so close. If I'm the 100th person to walk up to this crowd, I'm going to walk up to this crowd and think, you know what would be a great idea? I will join this crowd. That would really do well. No, of course not. That's not good sense. That's not good personal responsibility. But yes, personal responsibility has a part to play. But the government, the people who are in charge, also have a part to play, because this wasn't managed on personal responsibility. This wasn't given as a mandate. You know what? Everyone see about your own vaccine. See if you can source it. This had a central planning. And if you're the central planner, you have to plan well. And I still think that there are large gaps in planning. And something as serious, as purportedly serious as the vaccination drive that we're having, I think it's very unwise to move along in a manner that seems to want to face the problems as they arise. As the problem arises, we'll cross that bridge when we reach it. That's not how you work these things. You plan for all the bridges that you have to cross. But speaking about the difference between the public and the private distribution of vaccines and their different capabilities and efficiency, there comes the question of how much can a private company make their employee take this vaccine? Because one of the things that made the private rollout go so well is that a lot of these companies would have taken a roll of their employees, sent this list of names to the vaccine rollout center. So when their employees come, it's already prepared for them. Now that means that these private companies, at the minimum, will know which one of their employees are vaccinated. And is there some kind of repercussion that can be had based on this? And you're hearing many employees in many different sectors are very worried about this, and legitimately so. Because if you have worry about the vaccine and you're thinking that I do not want to take this, or I want to hold off on taking this, do you then have to worry about if you can hold on to your job in conditions and a situation where money and resources are already in a tight spot? Well, the president of the industrial court has good news. Can employers make it mandatory to take the vaccine? This is an article written by Deborah Thomas Felix. She's the president of the industrial court. To add context to my statement, I was a participant at a webinar that was hosted by the Trinidad and Tobago Chamber of Commerce in January this year. My understanding is that the purpose of this webinar was for the Chamber to gather information on the law and industrial relations practice to assist and guide its members in this time of crisis. The discussion was confined to issues related to the world of work. She went on to speak about a question that was raised to her during this webinar about whether it can be made mandatory to take a vaccine by your employer. And she responded by stating that in industrial relations, an employer cannot unilaterally alter or change the existing terms and conditions of employment of workers, especially if there is a recognized majority union present at the establishment. I went further to add that if an individual is not employed at the establishment but is seeking employment, an employer can insist that the individual gets a vaccine in order to obtain employment at the establishment. That is what is called a condition precedent to employment. And that whole thing makes sense to me. That's kind of where I stood in my view on it. If you are working somewhere already, it seems a bit of a stretch for them to now force on you a medical procedure that didn't even exist when you started that employment. the terms of the contract that you signed, the terms of your employment when you started that job didn't include this. So that could make sense to me. And that's what the president of the industrial court was saying. But a job can make it a condition that you must have a vaccine in order to get the job in the first place. Jobs make all kinds of conditions. That's the nature of jobs. They select what conditions they want someone to meet in order for them to be employed at my establishment. That's on the private employer. And the industrial court president went on to point out that the point she's making isn't that the contract cannot be changed, but that the contract would have to be changed. There would have to be some kind of agreement that must be had between the employer and the employee in order for these new mandated vaccines, if it be a thing in some private company, to be allowed for continuing workers. Further down, she said, we must remember that a vaccine is not a mask, a glove, a helmet, or any of the usual PPE used in the workplace environment. Vaccination is invasive. It goes into the body, and as I said then at the Chambers meeting, there are certain rights issues that go along with vaccination. And I guess that's the whole dilemma we find ourselves in. The battle between a person's personal and individual rights and the battle between an employer's rights to control the conditions they want their business place or their workplace to be under. This discussion is being had all over social media, and I'm pretty sure many of the places where the discussion is being had aren't going to find solutions or resolution, because generally many people go into these discussions already having a preformed conclusion on the matter. But there are so many interesting questions to think about in this. Here's this scenario. If a business place, some kind of tourist something to do with hospitality, has a mandate that all customers that they are going to allow into their business place, let's say it's a hotel, it's a bed and breakfast, they have a mandate that anyone entering their place must be vaccinated. And they have that prerogative. Management can refuse service. Okay, if we are allowing that, can the customer then in turn make a demand that they know the vaccination status of all the employees of the establishment? And in order for them to know the vaccination status, then the employer must know the vaccination status. And then we could see easily how a lot of the commercial system could end up being dependent on people's vaccination status. So then you could see why some businesses would still seek, even though the president of the industrial court said it's not possible to do it to workers already in employment, you could see why some businesses may still attempt to do it. We're seeing over in the US that their federal government says that employers can require COVID-19 vaccine under the federal law. And this was one of the articles that I saw posted as evidence that the industrial court, the president of the industrial court down here, may not have it precisely correct. And there actually may be just cause and legal avenues for employers to mandate the vaccines. US employers could require all workers physically entering a workplace to be vaccinated against COVID-19, the federal government said Friday. And right there in the first line of the article, we see one of the technicalities pop up. They can mandate it to anyone physically entering the workplace. What they went on to stipulate is that companies have the right to control their physical workspace, and that makes sense. A company can decide who they allow inside of a workplace. If we think that you may present a danger of making our workplace into a more hazardous workplace, then it's within our right to say, okay, we prefer you not come. But what they did say though is that in order for an employer to then terminate someone for this, they must first provide them with a suitable alternative, meaning they must give them an avenue where they can wear a mask to come to work, where they can work from distance, where they can work socially distanced or physically distanced. So it's still not something that is so cut and dry, that is so simple, that is so obvious. If you're trying to think about it and really trying to balance your view, you could understand it from various perspectives, really and truly. From the side of the owner of a private business, from the side of an employer, I can see that customers would prefer being in an environment where the workers, the employers there, the people that are handling them are all vaccinated. So, for example, if I were to own a nightclub, I would like to advertise to all the patrons coming in that my nightclub is fully vaccinated, and I believe that would attract new patrons. And when you're thinking about it, when I'm thinking about aspects of freedom and the arguments about freedom, the main arguments about freedom really have to do with government overreach and the government stopping you from doing something. But doesn't a private business have the authority to determine who they decide to interact with? If you're arguing for freedom, then isn't it freedom for a private business to determine that my employees must have this criteria? And whether it be a medical criteria or not, don't they have that prerogative? This isn't something new. Businesses have been doing this for a very long period of time. Not any and everyone could go to Hooters and get a job. They're looking for a specific physical trait. They're looking for you to meet a specific criteria. And maybe as this world is changing, we're going to see some of the criteria that some employers want changing with the world. So tell me what you think in the comments. Do you think that employers should have the right to determine how their private businesses are run and who they choose to employ within their private businesses? Do you think they should even have the right to determine even workers who have already been on the job, if they can have the right to mandate to that worker, still go get vaccinated, because by you not getting vaccinated, you could be negatively affecting my business? Or is that too scary a road to go down? And then we have the considerations of wondering, there's a fact that there's some vaccine inequity going on. So is it that some of the wealthier people would then be placed in a higher category? Because now we're going to be dividing society based on who is vaccinated and who isn't vaccinated. And we know that humans do not need much excuse to discriminate. Once there's some kind of division among people, discrimination almost always comes quickly into hand in hand with each other. So there is I am almost sure, I am pretty positive that should there be some way to differentiate between vaccinated and unvaccinated, there's going to be some discrimination and friction. The vaccinated may be calling the unvaccinated the stupid people who believe the conspiracies and are going to cause us to all die and get into a spike. And the unvaccinated may be watching the vaccinated as the sheeple who listen to the mainstream media and are fooled by all the tricks of the globalist conspiracists. Or maybe that's just an exaggeration of people who choose not to be vaccinated, and some may have legitimate reasons. So even the ones with legitimate reasons, do we then allow businesses to have the authority to either fire them or force them to become vaccinated? There are so many interesting conversations to be had in this. I'd like to see some of these conversations in the comments. Tell me what you think. Don't forget to share the video to those that may be interested in this style of content. And I'll see you in the next one.
When you wake up in the morning and you hear the birds cry and you feel the music rising with the tide.